Should I give context on that?
Yeah, what we just saw was a video made in Keynote, but that was a video. You want to start?
It's meant to loop, and it was made for a show at Bitforums called The Pointer, which was so the video is about white people. I don't know how clear that was, but it was 3 works at Bitforums about kind of how whiteness is imbricated with digital interfaces. And this one was made for a vertical screen, kind of meant to loop seamlessly, and as a kind of like kiosk or corporate lobby video that you could just kind of like dip in and out of. And so it's not exactly meant for a screening situation, but yeah, I guess it.
Yeah, I saw in the gallery, and it really makes a difference to see as an object. I think that's what you're feeling of the screen, right? Because I felt too when you see it in front of you as an object and kind of a body size, it makes a difference as it does in the size of the screen itself.
Yeah. Well, also the kind of it's fitting that there's a signal problem with the cable, because the whole kind of conceptual and material foundation of the video rides on like the seamlessness of like Keynote transitions and like the frame rate that you get with running the software. And so the argument of the video is made with the seamlessness of that animation format. And then when both when the video's choppy and we're also like showing it in a presentation style, there's already this kind of additional argument that we're trying to make for you to follow, which is kind of like doubling the kind of like purpose of, I guess, the thing I'm talking about, like how the video is attempting to make an argument and whiteness attempts to make an argument, and
we lose it. And we lose it.
And we lose it, but it's like it kind of exposes some of that, which is also nice in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't you explain how we didn't see it here, but how? Why did you use the video instead of just using Keynote as a slideshow? Because I think that will make us understand the difference in texture of what you plan to.
Yeah, so I mean, these slides are also in Keynote, and the thing about I guess a slide presentation is that you go from one frame to the next, and then the relation between all of these frames is supposed to be connected by the kind of the scripts that you have, or the explanations that you kind of glue them together with. I mean, I think like as a presenter, you're meant to kind of spackle together all of the frames, and so it needed to be a video because I wanted to do an animation, and I'm not an animator, or I can barely like draw. So Keynote was actually a software everything about it is meant to automate these things and make them easy, and it has like dozens of built-in transitions that are supposed to be attractive kinds of ways of kind of algorithmically connecting two things that don't actually necessarily make any logical sense or follow from one another. And so it was a good choice of software to use. But then you can also export a video from Keynote, but when you do that, it exports a video at like 24, 29 frames per second, like a standard kind of video frame rate. But then when you watch it, when I watched it, it didn't have the like when I was playing it in the software, it lost all that smoothness, because it's like I could sort of almost see it flickering after all of that, all of the smoothness of the software interface. And so I had to just play the software and record it manually on the computer to bring it up to like 60 frames per second, which is more of something you'd expect in like a gaming context, where you do get that kind of like smooth, all the smooth movement. and that's important because I needed the lines and the text to appear like almost like a material, like something fluid that you could swallow, rather than as, you know, just like some lines being drawn on a screen, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, I think the continuity between each frames and the transition is important to this work. So when we think about space, in a real context, we use volumes and height and all the information around us. I think the file is a lot about the architecture of the interface itself. So I'd like you to comment on this, on how, what is the relationship we can have when you depend on the environment of the software interface to deal with the material we are looking at.
So my approach to software interfaces is a kind of intuitive, embodied approach that has to do with how I grow up, but I'll end with that. But I think that other people have been doing work that I'm also picking up on, or also kind of in parallel with them. Like, so American Artist is one artist who has talked about his work is right now is about trying to find search for a black interface, and part of that argument is that, you know, when computer screens used to be black, and what you saw on the screen was what was happening. It was a projection of the monitor, and then the way you interacted was, like, for example, through command line, and it was something about reaching it more directly. When they started having a thing called a graphical user interface, or basically a GUI with windows and other images being drawn on the screen, this paradox started happening where you were becoming separated from the sort of like inner workings of the computer, as the computer was, and the designers were attempting to create a kind of false environment or projection by which you were being led to think that you were actually holding onto the material of the computer. So, like, you know, like if there's a window and you can drag it around and you can click icons on it, it's like you're actually like interacting with the computer, when it's basically a drawing that the computer is kind of like circuitously putting forth, and, you know, and even more so with touch screens on phones and things like that. And so for me, I'm not a coder, so I actually approach software as a user, and kind of with the assumption that I don't have an interest in like you know, tunneling down to the truth of the matter. I'm more interested in this state that we're in, where it's like, for example, if you want to have artwork, like if you want to have a video on the internet, you have to like have it processed through a kind of like a proprietary system like Vimeo or something, which further processes the video that you put in and spits out something that is a kind of semblance of your video, but actually technically isn't. And so there's I guess I do have a kind of like fatalism about it, where the way that you use the software as it's meant to be used, perhaps there is a way to show the kind of expectations that it is kind of putting forth, like all like consumer software packages like Photoshop, for example, are presented in like very empowering terms, like, and you're meant to be, you know, interacting with them to you know, to kind of like with this kind of aspirational mindset, which is very much like the way video games. I used to be a game journalist in New York, so a lot of my references are gaming ones. But, you know, video games are power fantasies, and so is Photoshop. And so that's basically the way this is a super long answer, I'm sorry. But
No, I guess,
yeah.
let me rephrase it. I guess what I want to point here is what the interface, what are the limits that the interface give to us? Because in this moment, for example, of this slide, is the moment where the narrative, for me as a viewer, it's the first moment I had a disruption, because until that, then white was talking and I didn't realize. But when black jumped to the forefront and started a battle to take over white, I realized that everything that was being said by white and not by the application as a whole, like a narrative, a general narrative. White, as the front of the file, was a character, and black was in the background and jumped. So I think this disruption, when we are talking about elements of an interface, that's exactly how we feel when you have your narrative, but you have to do it through the elements of the interface. So you have to get whatever shapes the interface allows you, or you have all the limits of the interface. And I think this was the moment where it got very clear to me. So here is another moment where you start talking, the wording meets very well with what is being said, because overall the graphical part goes to one side and the text many times to another in a very ironic language. And here they kind of go together. What did you have in mind when you use this wording, sharpen your points and do the meat of two different lines?
I kind of wrote to the animation, that itself was a kind of intersection of different things, but the wordplay, sharpen your points, and having a good point is just, and that is just drawing from my own experience. Like, for example, talking to white people on the internet, where people have points that they want to make, and it seems that if they present them really well, then somehow we'll reach a resolution. But points are just points, and so the other thing for me is like and this is kind of a joke about the materiality of the drawing, but and how this is a box. But I'm really bad at like physical fabrication, so the first time I made a metal box for a performance, and it was just this guy in my graduate program was helping me weld this box, and it was just 6 pieces of sheets of aluminum just coming together, and I welded it really poorly, but that I was very struck by like the fact that each edge of the box was also like an edge of like 2 sheets, and you could see that it was kind of like 2 edges coming into one, and so what is the point at which like the thing coheres into a box? And so like another thing is like I have this morbid thing where like I will look at a corner of a table like this and think like, oh well, phenomenologically, like you approach the thing and you just kind of like start to apprehend this shape. But I'm always thinking about like if I approached this table and I tripped and fell and my like eyeball like hit the corner of the table, then it would that's kind of like where my mind immediately starts going. And I think that was kind of what I wanted to do with the point, because the point is menacing, is the point. Like,
yeah,
okay.
but this is also the point where right after in your narrative it becomes very organic. So for me it's the point where we are able to access black, and black comes to the forefront, not with a battle as the first time, but as something very organic, and it gets very deep all these forms start having a movement with more of a 3D than a 2D, which is previously the way the application is going. So this is another moment in the narrative where I feel I understand as a viewer, and I'm comfortable that I know that now white is white and black is black, and what's the dynamics. And then all of a sudden, when I see this moment that says we guarantee this, for me it's another disruption, and I don't understand who is we and who else is in there. So how do you see this moment? And
well, so for me, this was also, I mean, and this isn't an intuitive process. So, but this is written, I guess, from the point of an organization. Well, in one sense, I have a day job working for a tech company, and so I have a lot of my waking mind is taken up by like thinking about writing marketing copy or technical copy, webinars and things like that. And that was kind of like the mode that I used for this. And so when there's a we, it's almost as if like a royal we, like, you know, we the organization are we're going to help you with this. But also, like what you were saying about this work, about this moment, was that you realized that there was something else present that wasn't visible until this point.
Exactly.
And for me, that thematically, it is about, you know, the video is about whiteness. It's obviously it's a white screen, and what whiteness is being projected, but it's not that. I'm not just saying like, well, the symbolism of white and the symbolism of black, and they're kind of interacting in this cartoon way. It's also about whiteness as functioning as a kind of invisibility, or like wanting to be a background and not present, and something neutral that is not actually doesn't have an active role. And that is, you know, you can see this whiteness as just a background, and I also see it as a background because this was on a screen on a white wall in a white cube gallery. But it's difficult to kind of manifest, like, you know, active whiteness, which is whiteness that's motivated by wanting to not be there. And so I think that's what maybe this moment is about.
Yeah, the moments when I say I feel disruption is it goes directly in the experience of of white not being neutral. So I think it's the experience of what you were criticizing, the neutrality and the emptiness of white as ideology. So those are the moments where I realize that there is something else there, and there is a reflection on my side as an experience of being with the artwork. So for me, it's also interesting that the paradox that usually we talk about technology as something dehumanizing or that separates. So you use these tools of the interface, and exactly the thing that separates us from being in contact with the black screen of the command line of a computer, to talk about how you can feel those human qualities. So how do you, that's what fascinated me on this artwork when I was in the gallery for the first time and I saw it. I said, how can this technology with black and white only give me a path to humanity? So if you want to close in that note.
I feel very much that, this is just me, so I actually don't know how you feel about this, but
it's all about
okay.
which one?
I don't, I'm not interested in searching for humanity, at least not consciously. I'm not interested in art as liberation. I'm not interested in freedom per se. I mean, I am as a human being, but like I'm not like consciously interested in that or pursuing it or trying to achieve it. And one example, so I don't think that there is a way out of it. And one example about the white and the black is that, if you use computers, like or in your phone or whatever, that like there are more and more apps and programs that have dark modes that are meant to like ease the blue light content and the white projection on your eyes, and that is meant to make it easier for you to continue using them. And so that is one way that, for example, darkness is co-opted by a white interface. And so the black interface is also a white interface in that context. So it just continues, and that's also like a capitalism a problem or a capitalistic logic. The way that the way I grew up was that I grew up in a really small town in West Virginia, which was 99.9% white, and so my parents were immigrants from Taiwan, and this was just a very intuitive this is a very intuitive stance for me. It's like if I walked outside, I was visible, and the visibility was not desirable. It was loaded with a choice, and the choice was, you aren't from, you're something else. You're standing out, so you must be like this, or this. And then the choice that I have is, do I, and I'm 8 years old or something. So it's like, the choice is like, do I appease that expectation? Like, do I present, do I say, oh yeah, kind of, or do I resist it and say no, this is who I am, but actually who am I? Because I'm 8 years old and I don't know what that means. And maybe there's a third option, which is to say well, maybe I'll take that information in and think about how I relate to it, but then how do I know where I stand in relation to that when I have no life experience? And so the point is that there was no, in that sense, my body is an interface, and I am supposed to be processing what is crossing it, and there is no actual answer, except the burden of being a minority is that you can't, you have to constantly, you have to attempt to answer this question, because America is an aspirational kind of country where there is this assumption that you could get you could get there, you could find yourself, but I don't actually know that is possible. And so for me, it's being caught in these loops, and so I'm interested in these kinds of loops in the works. I do a lot of branching software-based and web-based things, or games that play themselves but don't repeat, and so on. And so it's that's, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a heavy metaphysical kind of question, but yes, absolutely. I think that I do think of it in broader terms than software and technology. I don't identify with art plus technology. I'm not an art plus technology person. I'm an artist who uses things that are talked about in technology circles, but. For me, this goes back to what I was saying about growing up in my body and so on, because for me it's an orientation and a relation that is very neatly summarized and materialized by, and to me made really obvious by interfaces and also Western game design, where it's you have goals, right? And then the goal is to jump through these hoops and then get to level 90, and then you'll feel great because we said so. And so that for me, it's more about a kind of, you know, well, the reason the show was called The Pointer was because I was trying to imagine this white avatar that was not just a background, but something that was actually about an orientation of pointing, like pointing at, always away from the self, but never back at the self. And so for me, like these kind of everyday encounters with interface-like things like a bank machine or with an institutional construct, there's a kind of implication that you and your body are going to be purposed for something, and as a user, as like a user that's been framed in that structure of that interface, you want to think you're doing that for yourself, but it's actually but you're doing it on the terms that have been framed for you, right? Like so in that sense, like I guess it's because I just saw I went to the Underground Resistance talk at Performance Space, but he was talking about slavery being the first, like not the first, but like a very early example of like man being made machine, and so that to me is like the idea that like you see a person or you see a body and it's like you immediately think about how that body can be instrumentalized. And I was also reading something about, the slave being a necessary component in to Aristotle and Hannah Arendt in saying that, there is society and there's politics, and society is about the necessity of like living and doing like society things, and politics is about the citizen being free to be creative and political. But that means that there is someone in society that's actually holding that up. And so that kind of assumption, I think, to me, that's whiteness. That's like a relational kind of interface and an affective failure to me. That makes sense. Yeah.
I have a question. You said you were in games journalism,
Yeah.
so you probably have played a lot of video games.
Yeah.
What games do you have really loved to play over the years, and what purpose do you feel like gaming has had in your life?
That's Animal Crossing was one, and for me, I don't know. It's a hard question because there are many different types of games and different genres that operate really differently. But for me, like, I'm interested in play as how it relates to boredom and purposelessness, and like feeling like, for example, like when I'm in the studio, like, and I'm feeling creative, I'm also at the same time feeling like the weight of like my ass in the chair, and feeling like I'm fat, and feeling like I'm like my shoulders aching because I'm using this computer and all this kind of stuff. And there's this discourse of play that is about purposeful, meaningful play, where like you're in this like magic circle, and like there are rules, and then you tell a story or whatever, and like whatever meaning emerges out of that. And I like really dislike that because it's again about instrumentalizing the player. And so it's like what you were saying about the kind of like overlaps between something like Animal Crossing and a prison, like that's like for me, like it was always this experience of like staring at something until like something came out, and that could be any kind of game that basically doesn't try to tell you what it's there for, but it is there for something. But it's kind of like, to me, especially like more and more with Western kind of acceleration, it's like this urgency to like tell you more and for you to like adopt it. And many games are like that. I don't know, this Red Dead Redemption 2 that just came out, I'm hearing that it's like very not like that, ironically, because it's well, yeah, because it's like this Western panorama, and there's so much detail and so much like exploited labor went into like making the tree like move perfectly in the wind, and making your head like move around it like perfectly as you're like riding your horse to the forest. But apparently like there's so much, it just feels kind of like, it doesn't feel that great to like, you know, it's like clumsy to move, and like, it's very slow, and like, you can just go and like, you know, I don't know, just not, like, do, you know, just be in the world without like feeling like you're in the world to tell that story or to be that kind of hero or whatever, but just being in the world. Yeah.